So this is the last chapter for your syllabus. We will be discussing about the respiratory system. So respiration is a process by which food is broken down to produce energy and is represented by the equation glucose is broken down in the presence of oxygen to produce energy, carbon dioxide and water. So basically in the smaller classes when we are talking about respiration, you basically defined it as exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. To be more specific, you were given the definition that we are taking in oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide. But in reality, when we talk about respiration, it basically means breaking down of glucose to produce energy. This energy is utilized to do various functions. So this breaking down of food can also happen in the absence of oxygen, and the end products will be lactic acid and less amount of energy. So basically your respiration are of two types. If it takes place in the presence of oxygen, it is called aerobic respiration. If it occurs in the absence of oxygen, it is called anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic respiration basically happens if you are doing some exercises or playing sports. What happens is the muscle require energy, and in some cases this energy is easily provided by the muscles undergoing anaerobic respiration. So since we are discussing about the respiratory system, you should also take into account that the previous equation is not a one-step process. It rather occurs in a multi-step process, and it occurs in the cells, mainly your cytoplasm and mitochondria. So if we talk about the respiratory system, let's start with the nose. It starts from the nose, the nasal passage, then it passes to the pharynx, and then the trachea, and eventually to the lungs. So when we talk about the nose, what it does is basically it warms up the air as it passes through it. In addition to that, the nose also has hair-like structures and mucus secreting cells which trap the air and dust particles so that air free from germs passes through the pharynx. Then after passing through the pharynx, it passes through the larynx. It is also known as the voice box. It is more prominent in males. Then from the larynx it passes to the trachea. These trachea, what it does is, these are surrounded by rings of cartilages which prevents the windpipe from collapsing. This trachea, it branches off into two bronchi. This bronchi enter the lungs, and generally your left side of the lung is slightly smaller to accommodate the heart. So what happens is the air passes through and from the lungs oxygen diffuses out into the bloodstream, and it is transported to various parts of the body. The blood also brings back carbon dioxide, and again from the lungs it is expelled out. So this is basically in short what your respiratory system consists of. So generally when we talk about respiratory system, it has to be studied under two broad headings: breathing and respiration. So by breathing, what it means is we're taking in oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide. Then what happens is the oxygen that you're using in is transported from the blood to the various other parts of the tissues or cells. So in this particular case, what happens is oxygen is being used to break down food, that is mainly glucose, to produce energy. So when respiration is happening, you should also take into account tissue respiration or cell respiration. That means whether the respiration is occurring in a cell or in a tissue. Then this part where I said oxygen is transported by the blood and carbon dioxide also transported by the blood basically happens due to hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is present in the RBCs, which give it a red color. But the most important thing about hemoglobin is it is an oxygen transporter. Oxygen combines with hemoglobin forming oxyhemoglobin. So as a result, once the blood reaches the various tissues, the RBCs gives off oxygen. Carbon dioxide, in the meantime, how is it excreted is, it is either excreted via the blood, it dissolves in the blood as carbonic acid, or it may also combine with hemoglobin, but basically it dissolves in the blood forming carbonic acid. So this is how your oxygen and carbon dioxide are transported through the blood. So to understand the mechanism of breathing, what happens is inhalation and expiration are brought about by the contraction and expansion of the chest and your diaphragm. Diaphragm is a flat tissue separating the stomach from the thoracic cavity. Generally, your diaphragm in a relaxed state forms a dome-like shaped. So what happens in inspiration and expiration? Let's take into account these diagrams. So when you are breathing in, there is inhalation. The chest, it expands upwards and outwards with the help of intercostal muscles. At the same time, when this happens, the diaphragm, it relaxes. When it relaxes, it flattens out, thereby the lung capacity, it increases and air is pushed into the lungs. Now in expiration, that means when you are breathing out, what happens is the chest, they come back to the normal state. That means they come back to the lowered state, and at the same time the diaphragm also comes back to its normal state, that is it forms a dome shaped structure. As a result, the lung capacity decreases and air is pushed out because volume is decreasing and pressure is increasing, so air is pushed out. So this is how your breathing occurs. That means in order to take in air, the chest expands upwards and outwards and the diaphragm flattens. As a result, the lung capacity increases and air is pushed in. When we are breathing out, what happens is the chest, it comes back to its normal state. The diaphragm also becomes a dome shaped, the lung capacity decreases and air is pushed out. So depending on these, there are a few terms associated with breathing. Like tidal volume. It is about 500 ml. That means it is the normal amount of air that you are breathing in and out without forced breathing. Then there is inspiratory reserve volume. By this, what it means is when you are breathing in air, there will be some amount of air remaining in the respiratory passage. Then expiratory reserve volume is again also the same thing. When you are expiring out, there will be some amount of volume of air remaining in the lungs. Then vital capacity is about 4500 ml. By this, what it means is the maximum amount of air that you can breathe in and out with maximum forced inspiration and expiration. So these are the terms associated with breathing. Now there are a few experiments associated with respiration. One of the most important experiments associated with respiration is taking in oxygen and producing carbon dioxide. For this, what we do is we are going to take two conical flasks, label them as A and B. Both contain lime water. Both the flasks are connected by tubes as shown in the diagram. Then there are a few clips inserted in which closes or opens the passage. So in the first case, what we do is we close the passage of flask B and we take in air. This clip is open, so the air passes through A. That means we are breathing in. Again, we'll close A and then we'll breathe out, we'll open B. Now air is passing through it. We repeat the same process for about 10 times and we observe that lime water in B turns milky faster than in A, which proves that carbon dioxide is given out during breathing. Another experiment is to show the function of diaphragm during breathing. So what we do is we are going to take a bell jar. It is connected to a Y-shaped tube and the Y-shaped tube is attached to balloons. The open end of the bell jar is covered with a rubber sheet. So now what happens is when we pull the bell jar below, the volume is increasing. As a result, air rushes in and the balloon, it increases in size. But the moment we release the diaphragm back, the rubber sheet back to its normal state, what happens is the balloon returns to its original state. That means air is being expelled out. So this is to show how your diaphragm functions it. So rubber sheet represents the diaphragm and your balloons represents the lungs. So this is to show how your diaphragm helps in breathing. And the last experiment is to show oxygen is used during respiration. What we do is we are going to take two containers, place cockroach in both, then in one container we are going to place a burning candle and in the other just leave it as it. Then we are going to close the container and observe what happens is the cockroach in container A will survive, but whereas in B it will not survive, because when a candle is burning, oxygen is being utilized by the candle. So there isn't sufficient oxygen for the cockroach to breathe, so the cockroach eventually dies out. So these are the experiments associated with respiration. So this is the end of the chapter and the syllabus.